The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the dusty ranch, where silence spoke louder than words. Silas knelt by the weathered fence, calloused hands resting on aged wood. In the distance, a soft voice drifted through the evening air, hauntingly familiar yet foreign. He turned, eyes narrowing on the girl, a brief glimpse of Elowen, her dark hair cascading like a river, her lips moving in a forgotten tongue. Each night as the stars emerged, the girl succumbed to dreams, her breath steady, but her words danced like whispers of ghosts. Silas felt a strange pull, a bridge formed between worlds. Tonight, when she murmured in her sleep, a name surged through the stillness, his late wife's name, echoing through the remnants of a heart long thought healed. Silas lingered, breath caught, unspoken questions swirling in the twilight as an old sorrow blinked back to life. The sky stretched grey and heavy, clouds a shroud that dulled the sun's warmth. Elowen stood amid the chatter of the marketplace, her heart pounding like a drum echoing betrayal. Around her the air was thick with the pungent scent of livestock and the distant cries of children. She could hardly breathe, the laughter of others turning to a buzz of insects in her ears. Her brother, once her protector, stood too close, a shadow casting darkness over her spirit. The auctioneer's booming voice droned on, each word chipping away at the slender veneer of hope she clung to. When she was brought to the stage, bathed in a pitiless light, Elowen's lips parted to speak, to plead for freedom, but no sound emerged. A knot tightened in her throat as she remained mute. Understanding her worth was now reduced to a price determined by strangers. As the buyers gathered, their eyes roamed her form with a blend of disdain and desire, as if she were nothing more than a prized cow. Her brother's hand gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging into flesh, a silent command to endure. The finality of her situation loomed like a storm cloud, oppressive and inescapable. Silas watched from the fringes, the knot of sorrow in his chest pulsing with every garish bid. A veteran rancher accustomed to the weight of loss, he had seen enough darkness in his life. This scene stirred feelings he thought long buried. The light in Elowen's eyes flickered, a candle struggling against a gale, and he felt an unexplainable pull towards her. The auctioneer's voice rose with momentum, sealing her fate, and Silas found himself forcing his way closer, fighting against a tide of buyers eager to claim their prey. The bid escalated, numbers spiraling upwards like smoke in the breeze. Silas's throat tightened as he caught a glimpse of Elowen's pale face, her despair stark against the cacophony. She was hauntingly beautiful, despite the dirt smeared across her cheek and the way her shoulders sagged, resigned to whatever cruel fate might await her. He remembered the warmth of his wife's laughter, how it had once filled this very landscape with life. Now, it felt like a ghost. Silas felt the remnants of that happiness settling somewhere deep within, but he couldn't recognize it anymore. This was not the life he had pictured when he had first stepped onto his ranch. As the last gavel struck, Silas heard himself bidding, his voice steady, almost foreign to his own ears. The moment hung in the air, pregnant with possibility, yet tinged with dread. Outbidding others, he held compassion in his heart for a girl who had been reduced to currency. When the auctioneer acknowledged him as the winner, a hush swept through the crowd, an involuntary respect growing for the battered man who dared to intervene. As Elowen was led to him, her eyes met his, a fleeting connection glimmering in the storm of uncertainty. In that moment, Silas saw beyond the girl he had purchased. Her defiance resonated with his own loss, and he felt an urge to shield her, to protect her from everything that had stripped her of joy. But he also understood the chasm that lay between them. She was a commodity, an obligation now tied to his existence. The warmth of his heart began to chill, replaced by the heavy expectation of ownership, a burden he had not anticipated. The weight of her past loomed large, and he felt the sting of his own emotions, nudging him towards a sorrow he had long since buried. As they journeyed back to the ranch, The silence stretched like an old, worn-out blanket, heavy with discomfort. Silas stole glances at Eloan, who sat rigid on the worn bench beside him, a fine line of tension drawn across her brow. She spoke not a word, her gaze fixed out the window, watching the world slide by as if it were just another nightmare she could not escape. Silas's heart ached as he witnessed her suffering, yet an invisible wall remained between them, built by circumstance and fear. He was a stranger to her, a looming figure of authority who had taken her freedom. Arriving at the ranch, he gestured for her to disembark. The vast expanse of land surrounded them, tranquil and haunting with memories of laughter that felt impossibly far away. He could almost hear his wife's gentle voice carried by the wind, and it made his chest ache. He wondered if his presence reminded her of her brother's betrayal, of all that had been lost in that marketplace. Silas was not the savior she needed. He was merely a man trying to fill the gaping hole in his heart with something, anything, and hoping it would not drown him. Eloan stepped off the wagon, her feet touching the familiar earth, but it felt alien to her now. The ranch, once a space of possibility, felt like a cage. She glanced at Silas, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, but quickly masked it, drawing the shield back around her heart. The emptiness echoed between them, an invisible gulf that neither dared to cross. Though they were bound now by circumstance, the emotional distance would take longer to bridge than the miles they had traveled. Each step away from the wagon seemed to pull them deeper into a silence that tethered them to their grief, a reminder that healing would not come easily, if at all. The vast expanse of the ranch stretched out before her, a tapestry of muted browns and greens under a heavy sky. Eloan stepped down from the wagon, the dust swirling around her ankles like whispers of forgotten stories. The wind carried a chill that tugged at her thin clothes, but it was not the cold that made her shiver. It was the weight of expectation that settled on her shoulders, a silent promise entangled with uncertainty. She looked up, taking in the rustic outlines of the barn and the main house, shadows lurking in their corners as if holding their breath. Eloan took a tentative step forward, her boots crunching on the gravel path. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing through the stillness. Silas stood by the fence, his broad silhouette framed against the fading light. He glanced her way, a fleeting recognition in his eyes that quickly extinguished. She felt the scrutiny of his gaze, as if he were measuring her worth in silent calculations. There was something heavy about his presence, a quiet intensity that made her stomach twist. She forced herself to keep walking, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside the house, the air was thick and stale, filled with the aroma of old wood and distant memories. Dust motes danced in the waning sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. Eloan stood in the middle of the room, her reflection warped in the glass. She felt as if she didn't belong, like a ghost haunting a space that wasn't hers. Silas moved past her, gruff and unyielding, unpacking crates filled with essentials for her new life. He worked in silence, his movements purposeful, almost ritualistic. There was a rhythm to his actions, a cadence she felt compelled to learn. Days turned into one continuous blur of chores and silence. Eloan learned to milk the cows, her hands trembling at first, but gradually gaining confidence. The routines of ranch life were foreign yet oddly comforting. Yet every time she caught Silas's eye, there was a barrier she couldn't breach. She didn't know what haunted him, only that the weight of his unspoken history pressed down upon her like a heavy blanket. The kitchen table became their only point of shared space. Meals were consumed with little more than the sound of forks scraping against plates like a melody without harmony. At night, when the moon hung low and casting silver beams through the tiny window of her room, Eloan often found herself awakening from dreams that left her breathless. She could hear voices floating through her mind in the soft, lilting tones of a language almost forgotten, a language she had learned as a child. Latin, it whispered, swirled around her like smoke, and she would sit up, heart racing. It was in those moments of solitude that she would speak the words aloud, wrestling with meanings of regret, longing, and loss, unaware of the impact her nighttime confessions had on the man who listened from the shadows. Silas would stand outside her door, the deep timbre of her voice pulling him from his own storm of memories. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something in the way she spoke, steady yet fragile, made him ache. When he heard a name drift through the air, a name that had long faded from his heart, he felt as if the earth shifted beneath him. It was his wife's name, emerging from the depths of time, and he staggered back against the wall, breath caught in his throat. The pain was sharp, like a knife twisting deeper every second she spoke. He cursed himself for being vulnerable, yet he couldn't bring himself to turn away. Weeks passed, and with them came shifts in the atmosphere of the house. Ellawen started to notice small changes in Silas's demeanor. He was still distant, yet moments of warmth flickered like firelight between them. In the barn, they began to share fleeting glances. When their hands brushed against each other while reaching for the same rope or tool, sparks ignited. Still, the air remained thick with unspoken words, the boundaries of their individual grief too large to cross. Yet there was hope nestled in the crevices of their everyday lives, small gestures that promised connection. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ellawen stood outside, watching the horizon melt into twilight. Silas joined her, the silence between them more comfortable than it had been before. He sighed, a deep, resonant sound that felt like a beginning. As the stars began to twinkle above, she hesitated, heart hammering, unsure if she dared to reach out. But she did. She spoke the name that had haunted them both, his wife's name, and in doing so she cracked open the door to a world of healing. Silas turned to her, surprise etched on his face. For the first time, he looked into her eyes and saw not just a girl brought under the weight of sorrow, but a woman who understood the language of loss. Tears sparkled in her eyes as she whispered more Latin phrases, their meaning unfolding like a flower in the night. It was a simple act, yet it bridged the distance between them, weaving their stories into a tapestry of shared grief and tentative hope. And together they stood illuminated under the vast, uncompromising sky, finally free to acknowledge the pain that had brought them together. Silas stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, the sun dipping low beyond the horizon, casting long shadows across the parched land. Ellawen swept past him, her movements fluid, yet marked by a subtle tension. The soft rhythm of her footsteps on the wooden floor felt like a soft echo of a world he had long since abandoned, one filled with laughter and life. She clutched a faded book to her chest, the pages old and curled, a relic of her past. Silas had learned to navigate the silence that surrounded them, but it hadn't dulled the ache of reminder. Each morning began with routine. Ellawen would rise before the roosters, slipping into a world where the sun and moon danced to her whims. Silas would follow, drawn into her orbit like a moth to a flame, watching as she tended to the animals with a kind of reverence he hadn't seen in years. She spoke to them in low, soothing tones, her voice wrapping around the creatures with a tenderness that he found both comforting and unsettling. He began to absorb her idea of solace, a way of living entwined with the rhythms of nature. Yet there was something haunting in the way she did it. Glimpses of a life he was meant to share echoed through him, reminders of laughter lost to time. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire pit, the flames licking the cool night air. Silas leaned back, arms crossed, stealing glances at Ellawen as she traced constellations in the sky with unsteady fingers. Her laughter was soft, but it tugged at his heart, reminding him of a melody long forgotten. He wanted to ask her about the Latin she spoke in her dreams, the strange incantations that slipped from her lips like whispers of the past. Each night she muttered words cloaked in shadows, curling around him with a sense of familiarity that made his skin prickle. But he held his questions close, fearing what he might uncover. One evening, As the stars blinked into existence, Silas was struck with a sudden thought. "What do you think your dreams are trying to tell you?" he asked, testing the waters. Elowen paused, her gaze drifting from the flickering fire to the infinite sky. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, as if she was searching her own depths for an answer that eluded her. "I don't know," she finally confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's as if I'm reliving someone else's story, but I can't grasp the details." A chill ran through Silas, a whisper of fear mingling with intrigue. What story could connect her to these dreams? His curiosity ignited a fire within him, a yearning to unravel the mystery of the girl who spoke Latin. He had lost the capacity to dream long ago, buried beneath the weight of his own grief. Each question about her lifeblood felt like a step into the unknown, a bridge leading him back to emotions he had locked away. Silas found himself torn, the facade of his stoic heart beginning to crack under the pressure of her presence. For every bit of warmth that Elowen brought, there was a shadow of doubt that followed, a haunting reminder of the life he used to know with his late wife. As the days wore on, Silas found himself increasingly absorbed in Elowen, drawn not just by her mystery, but by her resilience in the face of it. She was a wild spirit, untamed and alive, yet the shadows of her past loomed large. One evening, he caught her staring into the horizon, her expression distant. It was then he dared to press further. "Do you ever think about where you come from?" he ventured, each word heavy with unspoken emotion. Her gaze snapped to him, a flicker of vulnerability revealing itself before she masked it with indifference. "It doesn't matter," she replied, a sharpness creeping into her tone. "I'm here now." The tension crackled between them, a chasm widening with each volatile exchange. Silas felt a pang of regret for prying into wounds that had yet to heal. He returned to his silent contemplation, but her words hung in the air, a reminder of the fragility that defined their connection. He wanted to ease her burden, to help her unravel the tangled threads of her history, but his own heart felt like a wildfire, untamed and threatening. Days turned to weeks, and the fall colors began to seep into the landscape. Silas noticed a change in Elowen. She seemed to soften around the edges, yet the deeper they ventured into one another's lives, the more carefully he tread. In a fleeting moment under a canopy of golden leaves, she spoke his name in her sleep, murmuring a name that brought both warmth and a chill to him. It was a name he recognized all too well, the name of his deceased wife. Fear sliced through him, intertwining with an unshakable curiosity. What could it mean? What dark secret still lingered in the shadows of their entwined pasts? Each question swirled around him like the autumn leaves, both beautiful and chaotic, compelling him to confront the demons waiting just out of reach. The pale light of dawn filtered through the dusty window, casting elongated shadows on the wooden floor of the small room. Elowen lay curled under a frayed quilt, her dream a collage of haunting images drifting away like smoke. In the previous days, Silas's presence had become a peculiar comfort, yet today an unspoken weight pressed at the edges of her consciousness. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, listening to the morning chorus of the ranch, the sound of hooves scraping against the ground, the distant calls of rustling birds. As she swung her feet onto the cold floor, the chill ignited a flicker of determination within her. Silas stood outside, his weathered frame silhouetted against the rising sun, the ranch sprawling behind him in all its rugged glory. He had a way of commanding the land, of working with its stubbornness rather than against it. Yet today, there was a shift in the air, a tension that coursed through him as he glanced up toward the cabin, his heart beating too loudly in his chest. The memories of laughter and soft whispers echoed when he thought of his late wife, but now they twisted painfully with the arrival of Elowen. He shifted his weight, mind racing with the implications of her dreams. When Elowen emerged from the cabin, Silas turned, his face a mask of stoic resolve. She wore an old dress that hung slightly loose on her frame, its faded colors reminiscent of the dull earth around them. There was a moment as their eyes met, a flicker of understanding that sparked an unexplainable tension. The sunlight clung to her shoulders, illuminating the freckles that danced across her skin. For Silas, the sight was a reminder of vitality, a stark counterpoint to the ghosts that filled his thoughts. "Good morning," Elowen said, her voice soft but steady, like a gentle breeze touching the edge of a storm. Silas nodded, but the silence that followed was filled with an unspoken burden, heavy and palpable, like ripe fruit waiting to fall. Elowen could sense the distance in his gaze, a wall built from years of grief that eluded her attempts to breach. She had stumbled into his life with her erratic dreams, unknowingly intertwining their fates. As they began their chores for the day, Elowen caught him watching her out of the corner of his eye. The way he furrowed his brow spoke volumes of his struggles, the longing for a past that would never return, and the confusion that blossomed with her nightly murmurs. She needed to talk to him, to bridge the unyielding silence, but the words were locked in her throat, strangled by fear. Would he understand that she was listening to him too? His own pains etched in the lines of his face and the slow flex of his hands. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, painting the world in golden hues. They took a break under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak, its roots deep in the earth, much like the memories Silas buried beneath layers of daily toil. Elowen fidgeted, her heart fluttering with a strange urgency. "Silas," she began, but the words felt clumsy and ill-prepared. She searched his face, wanting to reach the part of him that held the pain of loss, yet feared the reflection it would summon. Before she could gather her thoughts, the name slipped from her lips, unbidden and soft as a whisper. "Margaret." Silas's expression shifted, the way the wind changes direction, sudden and unexpected. The air thickened between them, and the light dimmed, as if the sun itself recognized the intrusion of sorrow. Elowen met his gaze, wide-eyed with realization and horror, wishing she could pull the name back into the depths of her mind. Silas's breath caught, and for a moment the ranch fell silent, the world around them forgotten. The name hung in the air, heavy and charged, igniting the flicker of vulnerability that had long eluded him. He swallowed hard, his heart racing as memories flooded back. The warmth of Margaret's laughter, the way she had tended the ranch with love. It was as if a ghost had stepped between them, weaving through the fabric of their lives with an unfamiliar intimacy. Feeling the weight of his gaze, Elowen's fear morphed into something else altogether, a desperate need to explain, to show him that she meant no harm, that she was merely a vessel for dreams steeped in loss. Silas exhaled slowly, and in that moment, they stood at the precipice of understanding, two souls bound together by grief, by the unyielding silence of the past, and by the flickering hope that perhaps, amidst the ashes, something new could emerge. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty ranch, settling into a warm embrace that blurred the horizon. Silas tightened his grip on the shovel, each stroke of earth breaking the silence around him. He liked to lose himself in the rhythm of labor after the sun dipped, finding a sense of peace in the toil. Yet his mind couldn't shake the memory of Elowen's soft voice murmuring Latin in her sleep, her words spilling like spilled ink across a page that had long remained blank since his wife's passing. Elowen had settled into the ranch, her presence growing like wildflowers in a forgotten meadow. The girls at the schoolhouse, who teased her for her strange speech, didn't bother her much. Silas admired the way her laughter echoed in the empty halls of the house, filling the corners where silence had taken root. Today, he caught her painting beneath the old oak tree, sunlight weaving through the branches like golden threads. She had begun to capture the land in colors he had long forgotten, hues that stirred something deep within him. He watched her from a distance, intrigued by her vibrant energy, which felt almost like breathing life back into the pages of his own past. Elowen's brush moved fluidly across the canvas, each stroke a whisper of her spirit. Silas felt something stir inside him, a flicker of connection sparking in the fading light. She painted with a fervor that spoke of stories untold, and he yearned to ask her what they were, but words remained lodged in his throat like stone. As the sun began its descent, Elowen stood, stepping back to admire her work. Silas felt an unexplainable urge to step forward, to bridge the distance that had grown, unwarranted yet familiar. He gathered the strength to approach, the earth crunching beneath his boots, echoing through the stillness. Elowen turned, her face lighting up at the sight of him, her eyes sparkling like emeralds in the dusk. "Silas," she said, a hint of curiosity wrapping around her voice. "What do you think?" She gestured to her canvas, eyes alight with the hope of receiving validation. The colors bloomed like wildflowers, vibrant greens, warm golds, and soft blues. He felt a pull, not just to the painting, but to her, an undeniable thread weaving their lives together, stitched with secrets and shared breaths. "It's beautiful," he managed, the words feeling foreign yet warm on his tongue. "The way you captured the light, it's as if you've brought the land to life." Looking deeper into her eyes, he felt as though he was peering into a vast wilderness of emotions that mirrored the very tumult he carried inside. The silence stretched between them, potent and ripe with unspoken questions. Then, as the last light surrendered to the night, Elowen reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm. The gesture was light yet electric, sending a jolt through him. In that fleeting moment, Silas felt a surge of vulnerability wash over him. Her touch echoed the warmth of his late wife's spirit, a comfort that felt surreal yet achingly familiar. "You're not just a rancher, Silas. You're also a keeper of stories. I can see it in you," she said softly, her voice tinged with something deeper. "What do you mean?" he asked, unable to mask the tremor in his voice. Elowen stepped closer, her gaze steady and piercing, as if she could see past the layers of grief he had carefully dressed himself in. "I think there's more to you than the land and the scars it carries. I can feel it. Maybe we can share those stories." Silas stared at her, the air thickening with uncharted emotions. He thought of his wife, the echoes of her laughter haunting him like a ghost, and the name that slipped through Elowen's sleep-touched lips, a name that had once been a soft melody in his heart. The shadows that lingered around them began to dissolve as he recognized the possibility of a new story, a tale woven not just in sorrow, but perhaps in healing. Silas reached for her hand, anchoring himself in that moment, feeling the connection bloom like the flowers in Elowen's artwork. Together, in that fragile dusk amidst silence and whispers, they stood at the precipice of a new chapter. The morning sun crept through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the barn, where Elowen was still unaccustomed to the rhythms of ranch life. Silas's footsteps echoed down the wooden hallway, each thud a reminder of his presence, his weight anchoring her in a world where silence was both sanctuary and prison. Crouched in the corner, she arranged the hay in a neat pile, her fingers trembling. The air was thick with the scent of earth and animal, and despite the warmth surrounding her, a chill of indecision coursed through her veins. Elowen had spent too many nights wrestling with the words she longed to speak, the Latin phrases dancing on the edges of her conscience like shadows yearning for light. It had begun as an innocent slip, a murmur in her sleep, but now it pulsed through her mind during the day, a siren call that pulled her from the safety of her silence. Silas was out there, a man of strength and rugged lines, but in his presence, her tongue felt as clumsy as a fledgling bird learning to fly. She wanted to talk to him, to share the thoughts that fluttered in her heart, yet the memory of her past, the past that had shackled her voice, held her back. She glanced towards the barn door, where Silas was returning, a bucket of fresh feed in his arms. As he stepped inside, the light caught the deep lines etched around his eyes, lines drawn by years of labor, of loss, and of love. A pang of longing twisted in her chest. He was more than a keeper. He was a man haunted by the echoes of his wife's laughter, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her own words might resurrect those memories, awakening both joy and sorrow in him. "Elowyn," he called softly, the way he always did, a gentle pull of her name that made her heart race. "How are you today?" The question hung between them, heavy and unrealized, and she felt the urge to answer, to reach out and let her voice break the barrier of their fragile connection. But the words shriveled like autumn leaves on her tongue, trapped by the weight of fear and uncertainty. As he approached, a flicker of recognition crossed Silas's face, a fleeting moment where his eyes sparkled with something akin to hope. Elowyn's pulse quickened, a collision of desire and dread. She wanted desperately to tell him that she was tired of silence, that the whispers of her dreams were more than a distant ghost haunting her nights. She envisioned the words spilling forth, vibrant and raw, yet the shadows of her past stifled her, slithering around her resolve. In a moment of defiance, she picked up a piece of straw, twisting it between her fingers. The sensation was grounding, a tether to reality, and she focused on it as a lifeline. Yet as she did, the Latin phrase sprang to life in her mind, vivid and insistent. The realization struck her like lightning. These words were fragments of her soul, yearning for expression. But what if they brought forth memories that Silas had buried? What if they awakened the specter of his late wife, the name that had once ignited his heart, but now lived only in the quiet confines of his grief? "No," she whispered softly to herself, the sound barely escaping her lips. The fear of ripping open old wounds paralyzed her, but with it came a spark of rebellion. She was not merely a girl sold to a rancher. She was alive, vibrant, and filled with thoughts that begged for release. The struggle intensified within her, a battle of silence against the yearning to be seen, to be heard. She could either remain a shadow or step into the light of connection, an act of bravery that terrified her. Silas knelt beside her, the distance closing as he studied her with a gentle intensity. "You don't have to hide from me, Elowyn," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. Those words clutched her heart tightly, the sincerity in his gaze unraveling the fear she had wrapped around herself like protective armor. "I want to know you." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and the warmth of his touch sent shivers through her. In that fragile moment, Elowyn felt the weight of her silence shift. The realization blossomed within her. To speak was to reclaim her power, to honor the girl she had been before the world had tried to silence her. With a deep breath that trembled through her chest, she lifted her gaze to meet his steady eyes. The words began to form, buoyed by newfound courage, and as she whispered the first syllables, she felt a surge of freedom, one that bore the weight of her past, but also the promise of a future intertwined with Silas's unwavering hope. The sun dipped low on the horizon, washing the barn in hues of amber and crimson. Silas leaned against the wooden beams, the rough grain pressing against his back as he glanced at Elowyn. She stood by the open door, her hair catching the glow of the fading light. Silas's heart ached with the weight of unspoken words hanging between them, words that felt both terrifying and liberating. He watched her, entranced, remembering the first night she had whispered Latin in her sleep, the soft cadence of her voice igniting memories long buried. Elowyn turned, sensing his gaze on her. The faint smile that curved her lips held so many secrets, but the depths of her eyes revealed a vulnerability that mirrored his own. Silas took a step closer, his pulse quickening. The distance between them felt monumental, echoing the vast fields that lay beyond. In that moment, he wanted nothing more than to close the gap, to bridge the divide that had formed not just from their pasts, but from the grief that still clung to him like a shadow. "Do you ever think about what we're doing?" Elowyn asked, her voice soft yet firm, cutting through the silence that wrapped around them like an old blanket. Silas hesitated, his heart pounding. It was a question wrapped in layers of meaning, a probe into the depths of his heart. He could feel the weight of her eyes on him, searching for answers he sometimes struggled to find. "Every day," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper, "I think about what it means to have you here, and what it means to feel alive again." The truth hung in the air, as palpable as the scent of hay and leather that filled the barn. Silas's chest tightened, memories of laughter and love and loss intertwined, each thread pulling at him, unraveling the carefully woven fabric of his life. Elowen stepped forward, closing the distance, her presence igniting a flicker of light in the shrouded corners of his heart. For a moment, the world outside faded away. Only the soft rustle of the wind and the distant call of birds remained, harmonious background music to the symphony of emotions building between them. Elowen reached out, her fingers brushing against Silas's arm, electric in its simplicity. It was a small gesture, yet it felt monumental, as if the universe had conspired to allow this connection to blossom amidst the pain. The warmth of her touch ignited something deep within him, a yearning that had lain dormant for too long. "Elowen," he said, the sound of her name a prayer on his lips, the weight of it grounding him in that moment. Silas faltered, caught between the longing spilling out of his heart and the fear of what lay ahead. He had held on to his grief for so long, and the thought of letting another in felt like a betrayal to the love he had lost. Yet as he stood before her, a voice echoed in his mind, his dead wife's name, a ghost that lingered still. But Elowen was no shadow. She was a beacon, and he was shackled to that light. "You're not a replacement, Silas." Elowen's voice trembled, breaking through the barrier he had built. "You don't have to feel guilty for wanting to move forward. I hear your heart, even in the silence." Her words cut through him, raw and tender, and he felt the tears prick his eyes, a release he had not anticipated. In that moment, he understood that she had been waiting for him, just as he had been waiting for her. His heart surged with a mix of confusion and clarity as he finally dared to speak the unsaid. "I need you to know. I miss her, but I also need you." And the confession was a lifeline, anchoring them in a shared understanding of their losses and their hopes. The air thickened with emotion, and he saw the light in Elowen's eyes shift, a realization dawning upon her. "Silas," she breathed, her voice breaking, laden with significance. It was the first time she had said his name, and it felt like the soft brush of a whisper against his soul. "You're allowed to embrace the future." The way she said it held a power that wrapped around him like a warm embrace, breaking down the walls he had built so painstakingly. He took a step forward, and in that moment, it was as if the earth shifted beneath them, reshaping their realities. "Silas," she spoke again, louder this time, each syllable carving a path to something new, something hopeful. Elowen took a breath, her heart bared, the fear of the unknown shimmering in her voice. "I promise you, I'm here. It's okay to let go." The words hung in the air between them, a bridge forged from grief and hope, illuminating a way forward. And in that fleeting moment, as the last rays of sunlight fell away, Elowen and Silas knew they could emerge together from the shadows, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. Elowen stood by the weathered fence, the sunset casting a warm glow across the sprawling fields where shadows danced like whispered memories. Silas approached, the weight of unspoken words heavy in the space between them. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers brushing lightly against her palm, a silent understanding passing through their touch. The wind rustled the tall grasses, carrying the scent of earth and fading daylight. Elowen's breath hitched as the names of their pasts lingered in the air, intertwining like the roots of the ancient oak behind them. She glanced at the horizon, streaks of orange and gold bleeding into the deepening blue, a canvas of loss and hope. Silas, feeling the tremor in her hand, turned to face her fully. The silence hung thick with the weight of their shared grief, yet it also held the promise of something tender. He lifted her chin gently, his thumb tracing the soft curve of her cheek, grounding her in this moment, this fragile truth. With a deep breath, Eowyn let go of the ghosts that clung to her. The breeze wrapped around them, a soft embrace as they stood together, two souls finding solace in the quietude of a shared evening, the past fading like the sun.